You know, I think over the past few years, we've had one hell of a run with action and survival horror titles. I mean, we got Resident Evil Village in 2021, followed up by the Dead Space remake and the Resident Evil 4 remake in 2023.
Sorry.
But then we also got the Callisto Protocol in 2022, a game I spent 12 hours and $70 on, both of which really could have been better spent on literally anything else. And just last year, we got the release of the Silent Hill 2 remake, developed by Bloober Team, a team kind of known for putting out some fairly middling horror titles.
That's a nicer way of putting it.
But I mean, even despite my own reservations, I gotta admit that they kinda knocked it out of the park with that one, really bringing that title to modern audiences in a way that didn't really crap all over the original.
Yeah, you're right.
So when they announced Cronos: The New Dawn, I was really looking forward to seeing what Bloober Team could do with an original IP, and if they could keep up that momentum that they got off of the back of Silent Hill 2. Well, after playing through Cronos twice and putting a fair amount of time into it, I gotta say that while I don't think Cronos is a perfect game by any means, I do think that Bloober have created what is probably gonna be a cult classic and is really gonna resonate with fans of the genre for quite a while.
Welcome to the location, traveler. Your task is to find your predecessor, ND3500. Secure the anchor. Let our work continue.
On to your butt.
Now, when it comes to the story, the basic premise of Cronos is that you play as the Traveler, who looks kind of a hell of a lot like the big sister from BioShock 2. Well, after humanity has been destroyed by a plague, the Traveler is sent looking for time rifts in order to hop back in time and collect the very essences of key individuals in 1980s Poland, you know, in hopes of keeping humanity alive. You spend most of the game in this post-apocalyptic version of Earth, fighting against the Orphans, which are these Cronenberg monstrosities, the result of the plague mutating people and eventually merging them together, kinda like that one scene from the 2011 The Thing.
Gross.
Over the course of the game, you'll make your way to different areas like a city block, a steel mill, a hospital, and a church, collecting the essences of different people and slowly unraveling exactly what happened here. Of course, it doesn't take long at all for things to go from bad to worse, because as it turns out, placing other people's consciousnesses into your own body is actually pretty bad for your health, especially if that consciousness is much less of a, rockstar Keanu Reeves and more of a Polish Dale Gribble.
Government sent you, didn't they?
That's what they want you to think.
Sir, we are they.
So there's actually a whole lot going on here when it comes to the plot. I mean, you've got the mysterious plague, time travel, the protagonist's mind being taken over by others, and the question of who you even are and what exactly your purpose for your main mission actually serves. And I mean, I guess it really just comes down to personal taste, but I just didn't find any of this compelling or interesting in the slightest. And it doesn't help either that the plot twist is one that even a blind man could have seen coming from a mile away. Cause yeah, you play as a presumably female character, and so when you meet the only other woman in the game that you're really interacting with, a game where, time travel and consciousness can be transferred into new bodies, of course, you turn out to be an alternate version of that woman. And I don't know, man, I guess that even a game like Dead Space had a predictable plot, with the game literally spelling things out for you, but I just found that to be way more compelling, especially in the remake where Isaac is a far more fleshed out character.
Isaac, what's your status? Do you have the captain's rig?
Fuck me!
So like, overall, I just think they kinda dropped the ball here, at least when it comes to storytelling, especially after Silent Hill 2. Though, to be fair, that wasn't exactly their original story.
Yeah, you're right.
Now, what I will say is that despite the actual narrative being a bit of a letdown, it does lead you to some super cool and interesting environments that you get to explore. I mentioned those 4 main locations, the city block, the steel mill, the hospital, and the church, and all of these are unique to each other with their own visual styles. The city block, for example, is this super dark and snowy abandoned street, complete with a park area, some stores, and an apartment complex. And the steel mill is this super dusty, rusted, and red landscape with warehouses and abandoned medical tents. The hospital is super reminiscent of Silent Hill 2, and is filled with a disgusting biomass that forms when a bunch of people congeal into a single mass, with different body parts sticking out of it like something straight out of the Blob. Then the church, or the abbey, has a cemetery and an underground catacomb for you to navigate. And look, I think there are a lot of things that you can criticize Cronos for, and I'm going to, but having an all-out fight in a spooky cemetery with what are essentially walking corpses ain't one of them. I have to mention too that there is a sort of central hub, that being a train station, where you'll do a fair amount of exploring and fighting, mainly to power up the trains that'll get you to your next destination. And while these places are all unique to each other, they do have some similarities, mainly having to do with how this world has been absolutely devastated. You can find this gross biomass growing everywhere, but then there's also this sort of anti-gravity, with entire structures having been ripped apart and then just kinda left suspended in place, giving Cronos this really unique and stylized look. And on top of those really cool environments is a soundtrack that really brings to mind a lot of the music that we got in the 80s, with that sort of synth and heavy bass sound. And I think the only thing that brings the whole thing down for me is that this is yet another game developed with Unreal Engine 5. So like, despite a lot of the gorgeous visuals, it still stutters and hitches constantly, no matter how I tweak my settings. What I will say though is that Bloober do seem to be working on updates for the game, and they're managing to do so without having a complete and total fucking breakdown on Twitter. But to get back to the environments themselves, each one is relatively small and contained, with you exploring and backtracking in order to find supplies, unlock doors, and solve puzzles. Typical survival horror stuff. But there is a pretty surprising lack of actual puzzles in Cronos. And in fact, I think there's really only one instance of what you could even really consider a puzzle at all, with this section at the Abbey where you have to find these objects around the environment, then place them in the correct spots in order to unlock a door. And even this one ain't exactly gonna cook your brain, you know what I mean? With the real challenge coming from even getting the pieces in the first place. The rest of the puzzles in Cronos involve you using this tool attached to your gun in order to change the environment around to navigate, or this one that lets you redirect electricity in order to open doors. And there definitely were opportunities to have more puzzles. Take the hospital for instance, where you're running around trying to find these ingredients in order to make a serum to destroy this heart. I really thought it was going to be similar to the vial puzzle in the Resident Evil 2 remake, with you having to figure out how much of each ingredient to use. But no, you just find them, plug them in, and you're ready to go.
Good gun. Good.
And I guess puzzles in action or survival horror titles aren't exactly a requirement, because even Dead Space also had just no puzzles to speak of, But with Bloober having just released Silent Hill 2, I guess I just kind of expected for there to be more than there were, you know what I mean? But even then, the pacing of these areas with the backtracking is pretty excellent, and as soon as I felt like maybe I was hanging around one area for too long, I found the person I was looking for, scooped their brain out, and got the hell out of there.
What are you doing?
Preserving.
Now, when it comes to the combat side of things, Cronos is kind of a mixed bag for me. Playing like your standard over-the-shoulder third-person shooter, like Resident Evil 4 or Dead Space, you'll shoot, punch, and burn your way through a bunch of orphans. Shooting feels really good, with weapons being super loud and punchy, with several of them even having a charge-up attack that does more damage and can stun enemies. And despite looking a lot like Dead Space, the ammo economy is actually pretty stingy. Whereas in something like Dead Space, you're often flush with ammo, Cronos pretty much only gives you enough for each encounter, where you don't really feel like you ever just have a whole lot of ammo to waste. I was almost never in a situation where running away was the best option, and in fact, there are a lot of times where fighting is the only option. But you definitely have to watch your shots, especially when coming up against armored enemies that have specific exposed weak points. What's super interesting too is that partway into the game, you'll get a tool that shows you the health of enemies ranging from green to red. And this is actually a super useful tool to see just how much damage that you've done to enemies, as well as to be able to suss out any bodies that aren't as dead as they might seem. Now, when it comes to the actual weapons that you're using, there's a fair bit of variety. You'll start off with that basic pistol that can be charged up to stun enemies and do a bit more damage. But pretty quickly, you'll get a shotgun that can also fire charged shots.
I'd like to keep this handy for close encounters.
It will help gain an advantage in close quarters.
As well as a rifle that can fire in bursts or fire homing projectiles, and even a grenade launcher. There are also variants of the rifle, pistol, and shotgun. There's a fully automatic pistol you can find, a shotgun that fires 2 rounds rapidly instead of charging, and a rifle that can charge up, firing 3 rounds rapidly. I found myself ditching that charging pistol as soon as I got the full auto version, but I did keep the charged shotgun over both of my playthroughs, just cause it offers a wider blast, letting you clear entire rooms with an entire shot. The grenade launcher is super useful as well, with my only real complaint being that by the time you get the thing and really get to start using it, the game is already almost over, which is a real shame because this thing can absolutely dumpster entire rooms of enemies, making some of those later encounters a total breeze.
Hot as hell in here.
Yeah, man, but it's a dry heat.
I do wish that there was a bit more gore in the entire game though, at least when it comes to the combat. And I think that maybe we've just been spoiled lately, you know, with games like Dead Space having that peeling mechanic that let you flay enemies down to their very bone, and then something like Dead Island 2, which also just had some really great gore effects, again letting you just absolutely tear enemies down to their default factory pre-assembly condition. Still though, when Cronos really lets you go at it and you're blasting and burning through enemies, combat can be really satisfying. What I want to mention too is that a lot like The Last of Us and the more recent Resident Evil titles, Cronos has a crafting mechanic that sees you using different parts like chemicals and metal scrap to craft ammo and health. And a lot like those other games, crafting is super useful with you being able to create just enough resources to keep the fight going. And again, like those other titles, Cronos allows you to upgrade both the Traveler as well as everything in your arsenal. You can upgrade your health, inventory capacity, and your crafting supply capacity. Then with the weapons, you can upgrade damage, ammo capacity, stability, durability, reload speed, and charge speed. The Traveler is upgraded using cores, which can be found pretty sparingly throughout the environment or when you rescue one of the cats that you find. Cause yeah, man, one of the main collectibles in Cronos is cats.
I wrote a blog post a while ago about why I f***ing hate video games, because this is what it does. It appeals to like the male fantasy.
I wish to pet you. May I?
Weapons can be upgraded with a resource just referred to as energy, and this is easily the most common resource that you'll find, often just found lying around, inside of boxes, or dropped by defeated enemies. What I do think is a bit disappointing by the whole upgrade system though, is that there are no unique upgrades for any of the weapons. Like, you know in Resident Evil 4, you could get those special final upgrades that allowed you to increase things like critical hit rates, piercing ability, or magazine capacity. Or in the Dead Space remake, you had those special nodes that allowed you to add some unique abilities to each weapon, like an upgrade that increased the Ripper's ricochet ability, or an upgrade to the plasma cutter that allowed you to set enemies on fire. And Cronos just has nothing like that. Still though, you can easily reset your upgrades if you find yourself wanting to change up which weapon you want to use, which is a nice feature. Another huge part of the gameplay too is the fact that living enemies can merge with dead ones, creating more dangerous variants. But I actually think that this is a feature that was a bit oversold in the marketing, because even on hard mode, you can pretty easily prevent most enemies from merging at all. Because as long as you can burn enemies or corpses, they're not able to merge, and you'll have plenty of opportunities to be able to do that. Firstly, you've got a torch, which is sort of this quick use grenade that can burn dead enemies and stun living ones. And on top of that, you've also got a proper grenade that can be launched at a distance, sticking to any surface and exploding when an enemy is near it, catching everything in the nearby area on fire. Then you've got explosive canisters and fuel that can both be used to explode and burn any nearby enemies. And you can even use these multiple times, with that time manipulation tool also able to bring back already destroyed canisters. So it's like, as long as you're on the lookout for those barrels and keep a torch or a grenade on you, you really don't have anything to worry about. Aside from shooting and burning enemies, you also have a melee punch and a stomp, both of which do absolutely fuck all against regular enemies. And I think that this is probably one of the most missed opportunities in the entire game. I mean, melee wasn't very effective in Dead Space either, but in that game the stomp was used in 2 and on in order to get supplies out of corpses in a super satisfying way. Here though, the stomp doesn't do anything to corpses and is instead primarily used to just break open boxes. What I find odd too is that Silent Hill 2 let you dodge as well as combo attack enemies as James, who is just kind of some scrub. But here, playing as a presumably combat trained individual, you can't so much as dodge enemy attacks. And like, look, I get it, this ain't Silent Hill 2, but I guess I can't help but compare Cronos to the game that the same developers just put out a year ago. And I mean, look, I'm not asking for Resident Evil 4 style melee, you know, where you could parry a kitchen knife before sending some poor villager to the afterlife with a well-placed roundhouse kick. I just kinda wish that the melee had a little more going on with it, especially when the rest of the combat has some really nice nuance to it, like bodies having to be burned and enemies having armor or weak points. Which, yeah, speaking of enemies, they also kind of leave a bit to be desired. You've got your standard enemies introduced early on that can be put down fairly easily, but then you've got the upgraded version that can appear if 2 enemies merge. And these guys are the ones with a sort of body armor, forcing you to aim for the unarmored section of their bodies. Then there are these guys that can spit acid as well as crawl around on any surface. Finally, there are these larger enemies that have a lot more health and are much more of a threat. And even they can merge, gaining armor and acid abilities, with this one I came across in the hospital, forcing me to just run away after spending all my ammo on it like a complete idiot. Then there are more environmental enemies, with these ones that can explode into acid, and then these guys that can grab you, forcing you to either burn them or mash a button in order to escape. What I think Cronos really lacks though is in the boss fights. Most of these come down to you just shooting until whatever enemy you're fighting drops dead. And I do think that's how a lot of these boss fights go in most games like this, you know what I mean? Fights that just have you ammo dumping into whatever big ugly monster is thrown at you. Here it's often against these guys covered in this black tar looking stuff that requires you to burn them, exposing orange glowing weak points that you then have to destroy. And like, this really wouldn't bother me too bad if it wasn't for the fact that the last couple of areas in Cronos have some really decent boss fights. The one in the Abbey, for example, has you shooting those orange weak spots, but also fighting regular mobs, forcing you to move and shoot as efficiently as you can. Then, partway into that fight, you'll have to use your time manipulation tool to get to higher ground and avoid acid damage as the arena floods. And I mean, up until this point, boss fights were just you in a small arena with whatever monster, but now they're actual mechanics that you have to engage with. And then after this one, you have to fight the Pathfinder, which has you anticipating his phases, dodging his attacks, and even escaping the arena as he does these AoE attacks. And it's like, these were so much fun that I was just really wishing that the rest of the fights in the game were more like these.
Yes, that's understandable.
What I think is the most disappointing aspect of the whole package though is the replayability, or rather the lack thereof. Cronos took me about 11 hours to finish my first go around and around 8 for New Game Plus on hard mode. And aside from unlocking a single costume, a new difficulty, and an alternate ending, there's really no reason for you to keep playing. I mean, Silent Hill 2 had multiple endings, new weapons, and new costumes. Dead Space had new suits, new enemies, and a new ending. And the Resident Evil games have new weapons, costumes, challenges, and more. And Cronos just has none of that. You can finish upgrading your gear and get that new ending, sure, but that's about it. It's like, where are the new guns or the new costumes? There's no arcade mode, no challenges, and I get that not everyone wants to play the same game over and over. Some people just want to play once and then move on, and yeah, I guess that's fair enough, but I think that games like this often live through their replayability, and Cronos just has none, and I think that's a real shame. Still though, I guess there's really no point in bitching about things that aren't in the game, or, you know, how it could have been done differently.
Yes, that's understandable.
Especially when, as it stands, Cronos is still a really fun and engaging survival horror title. And in a lot of ways, what it really reminds me of is The Evil Within. Released all the way back in 2014 and developed by Tango Gameworks and published by Bethesda, The Evil Within was a game that, despite a whole bunch of shortcomings, was still somehow greater than the sum of its parts. I mean, its story was kind of all over the place, and whoever the hell decided that zooming in all the way on the gun when aiming should be put in fucking prison.
He's out of line, but he's right.
But even then, everything in the game came together in a way that was hard to not appreciate. It was fun, unique, and it had style. And even the stuff that I took issue with was mostly addressed in the sequel. And to this day, The Evil Within is still held in pretty high regard by a lot of fans of survival horror.
I knew it.
And I think that's exactly what's going on here with Cronos: The New Dawn. I don't think the story is exactly great, and I think the combat leaves a lot to be desired, but I also think that despite my issues with it, everything still comes together just like it did with The Evil Within. Enough so to where I really hope we get some sort of sequel in the future, one where they really lean more on the combat side of things, you know, adding more weapons, more enemy variety, and more interesting boss fights. I'd like to see more replayability, with more challenges to tackle, new stuff to unlock, and just more reasons in general to keep playing. Basically, what I want to see is the sort of sequel that Dead Space got with Dead Space 2, or The Evil Within had with The Evil Within 2. Because I do think that what's here is really solid groundwork for a new survival horror franchise. Bloober Team really has come a long way, and while I don't think Cronos the New Dawn is a masterpiece by any means, I do think that it's kind of a cult classic in the making.
That is all that is said.